of the work that I do and that Kamal has done is working with funders to try to understand how the media landscape is changing and what that means about the ways in which they should support various social issue and democratic principles in media. So public media, how that is supported and how it's evolving, how inclusion in media, which is the primary topic of this report and this, I guess it's a toolkit now, what it means social media emerged, what it means when mobile media emerged. And because she and I have both been doing this in one way or another for the past 10 or 15 years, we have a broader understanding of how media changes over time and how whatever is emerging starts to raise the same sorts of questions. And one of those primary questions is who gets to make the media? And another primary question is who's being represented in the media, and are their stories being told accurately? Are they being told compassionately? Are they being given a voice? So that was the impetus behind the Ford Foundation funding Kamal to do this research. We took the research and we serialized it over Immerse, which is the publication that I edit in collaboration with MIT's Open Documentary Lab. And then people were clamoring for it all to be in one place because it was spread across all these different different posts on Immerse. And so we've created this toolkit. And what I wanted to do is kind of give you a walkthrough. So this is hot off the presses. Literally, I got the hard copy for the first time today in the mail. This presentation, we just finished it yesterday. It might have typos in it. So you guys are our beta testers. And you're going to be able to tell us if it makes sense, what it is, whether it's relevant to your lives. We can't wait. We're excited. So I wanted to sort of just pick up where Kamal left off last week in terms of, she gave you a sort of a mind-bending tour of what might constitute emerging media, which changes all the time, but she gave you a lot of examples, and some insight into how her own career and training led her to this work. In the duo, she's the visionary and I'm the more practical person. So I'm going to be talking about solutions and ways in which you can actually think about addressing some of the issues that are brought up in the first part of the book. But because Kamal wrote the primary, like the central text, and if you're looking at the actual publication, a lot of the copy that's in the middle of the pages Kamal wrote, and a lot of the sidebars and the resources Carrie, my editor, and I put together. So because she is a visionary, she went big. We're not just going to worry about what media is and who's creating it. We're going to reimagine all of reality. And so the concept is that media is the way that we get to understand reality, the way that people learn about other people, they learn about civilization, they learn about social mores. And so if you change media, you're actually changing reality. As I said, she talked about a lot of different types of emerging reality. When we started the project, virtual and augmented were really the focus. That's where a lot of the energy was. That's where funders were putting money. That's where the production stuff was happening. Since then, there's been a little bit of a shift to being more concerned about artificial intelligence and the role of algorithms in the way that they shape both our public life, because they shape what we see on social media and they shape the way that news is served up to us, and also how they have the potential to have real world effects, both in areas like criminal justice and housing. Algorithms and artificial intelligence are shaping all kinds of policy decisions and resource decisions. So you'll find more about that in this toolkit than happened in the original. Why now? I mean, it's always relevant, but as I was saying, the media we consume has an enormous impact on our perception of reality. That's especially true right now during this contested election, because people are actively trying to manipulate what we understand about news and information and about our political options. If the full range of humans are not telling the stories or are not represented in the stories, then we have a skewed perspective on what's actually happening out there and the ways in which media is conveying truth. So it's important as soon as possible to try to make media more representative. It's also important to start at the beginning of a technology's adoption cycle, because when something becomes widely adopted or becomes heavily invested in, it's already become ossified and people have already decided what that media form is, how it operates, and who can control it. So interceding at the beginning of a new media form has a better potential to actually make change later down the line. And then we're in this moment of incredible turbulence and chaos with the pandemic and various other disruptors that are happening with the environment, with the election, with our global political system. And that's frightening and it's concerning, but it also creates openings. So we're going to speed through the critical issues to address. You're going to have to read all about them if you read the toolkit. But these are just some of the, in the section that's titled Critical Issues to Address, which in the toolkit is section 2. We look at the need to challenge bias, both individual and systemic. So one way that you can do that, wait a second. Sorry, first time through this presentation. So that's obviously a huge conversation right now across all institutions in the United States, especially around policing, but in media, in government, in education. How do we recognize bias? How do we stop repeating it? How do we create moments of equality for people? How do we do that as individuals, and how do we do it in our institutions? And some of the ways in which the institutions that we live and work in are structured reinforce bias, and they reinforce siloed thinking. So we talk about in the toolkit ways that you can recognize that and address it. There are issues around trust. Trust in institutions and in leaders has diminished tremendously over the last 20 to 30 years, according to various polls, especially around journalism and government. So that's a problem. There are biases and segregation in education systems, despite efforts to desegregate them. That has implications for who has technology and media skills to be able to enter these systems that we're writing about, and whether people have enough digital and media literacy to actually understand the media that they're consuming. This groupthink concept extends not just to educational institutions, but in any possible place where people have concentrated power and the same sorts of folks are making decisions. So how do you disrupt those silos? How do you create connections across disciplines? How do you create connections across different types of institutions in order to open up thinking? What's the role of imagination and media in that? And just in general, ways of trying to address bias and prejudice have been unsuccessful. Even the ones that you might have gone through yourselves, not working. So that has ramifications, obviously inside of media, which is what we're talking about, but everywhere that people are trying to grapple with these questions. We really built out this section on structural and political issues because the controversy over social media, misinformation, and privacy has blown up since 2016. There was already a critique that traditional media, broadcast, print, radio was consolidated. That means it's owned by just a few corporations, which means that there's a top-down control. The same thing has happened in the digital landscape. So there used to be this sense that the internet was decentralized and that there were lots of different voices on it, but more and more, not only have the people who create content, digital content, been consolidating, but that content has been moving into walled gardens like Netflix, like the App Store, places where the original vision of the web as sort of an open public sphere have, it's become more like a mall. Just to privacy and security, this has become a huge concern around the ways in which our personal information is utilized. Also around surveillance being ubiquitous and cameras being everywhere. Algorithmic oppression, we'll get into that a little later. Basically what I was saying about how the ways in which the systems are coded that make decisions automatically have bias baked into them from the get-go. Polarization, people are moving more and more into their red and blue camps. They have more and more extreme ideas. They are more and more likely to not trust the other side. And this has been exacerbated by the ways in which technology forces people into those positions and leads them down rabbit holes to much more intense versions of the opinions that they might have held. There's a lot of misinformation. We don't really know who's in charge. There's a lot of anonymity and ways in which people are behaving in just, we don't know what people's motivations are online, and when they're making media, we can't always tell who's producing it. Many of the platforms and devices that we use have, and games and social media have been designed to keep us on them, keep us using, keep us running. And there are physical and emotional effects as a result. So you can find this breakdown if you have the toolkit on, let me see if I can find it, page 68. And this is part of a much larger conversation that's raging across the globe around how to control social media and big tech companies in order to try to roll back some of these threats. So this algorithmic bias, sort of the most obvious example of it that we talk about is that initially during the creation of facial recognition algorithms, Black faces were not recognized. They weren't even in the algorithm. So this artist has actually done an entire project on that, has been making the rounds trying to show how that's an example of the ways in which bias can be encoded in a system, and that can have a wide-ranging set of effects. All right, so that's all pretty scary. What are we going to do about it? So in section 3 of the toolkit, we talk about many different resources and approaches. This was created initially through feedback from the more than 100 interviews that Kamal conducted in the initial study. Carrie, my editor, and I took that apart and we restructured it around 3 different buckets. What kinds of changes can you make personally in order to address these issues? How can institutions shift? And then what can we do about our larger systems? Those include our technological systems, policy, the ways in which institutions work across one another, the ways in which silos are broken so that they can work with people in other disciplines. So these are the 3 big areas you'll find in section 3, and we'll go through them in a little more detail. All right, so change starts at home. People who are making media have to understand where they fit into this system of privilege, what biases they might hold, and how they're going to address that. So there are different ways to go about that. The first is to really understand that even if you think that you're not biased, you probably are. And one way to do that is to take this test from Project Implicit, which basically shows you a bunch of faces very quickly, and you're asked in sort of a gamified way to associate those with particular values. And the results will show you what those associations mean. Another way to address this question, especially if you're a person like me who is in a privileged position, is to think about how you're going to be an ally to those who have less power or less access. And to make an explicit effort to try to recognize makers of color, women, people who are not normally, who don't represent the largest percentage of those who are leading media companies or whose work is being showcased, to try to band together to make those innovators and creators more visible. This is an effort to try to do that more systematically. So basically this reframe badge, the red badge on the upper right-hand corner, is given to projects that represent a certain level of gender and racial diversity. Advocating for the underrepresented, so actually speaking out in meetings, making sure people have the chance to talk, creating space, pointing out when the panel is not diverse, all of these types of strategies in your own profession and life. Here's a organization that provides some strategies for doing that. And then crafting narratives that disrupt biases. So one of the primary ways in which people can spot biases in media is when they feel as though their own story isn't being told from a one-sided perspective. So this is just an example of a project that tries to disrupt that by, it's kind of a game show on YouTube that brings people together from different perspectives to tell their own story, to have them talk across difference, to create empathy. I haven't tried this myself, but Carrie says her son loves it. So I have to make some time to check it out. He's 9, so for what it's worth. All right, so moving beyond the sort of personal change realm, how can we change individual universities? How can individual media projects change their own behavior? How can outlets change their behavior? There's been a lot of controversy and debate and backlash in the last year or two around the Me Too movement, and now around the question of racial representation in newsrooms, for example. So many of the legacy outlets that we are used to, well, I'm older than you are, that those of us who grew up earlier are used to consuming are now questioning their own practices and sort of having to come to some new understanding. So one of the most obvious ways to do this is to conduct an equity audit, just to look at who's on the masthead, who's in the, who are in the credits, what, you know, where do they come from, what are their backgrounds. There are also a number of other strategies. This book, What Works, by Iris Bonet, takes a more sort of social scientific look at the ways in which companies have tried to be more more rigorous in their attempts to be equal in their hiring decisions. So for example, one thing they found is that when you put people who are auditioning for an orchestra behind a screen so that people can't see who's performing, a much more even distribution of who is hired happens. So again, with the sort of embedded bias that people are not necessarily aware of. Search beyond the current milieu for talent. So if you have a job that you want to put up, don't just put it on Facebook to your network that already exists. Like explicitly go out and try to find diverse candidates. Centering different cultural norms. So we don't want every room to look like this. We don't want this to always be the people who are making decisions. If you change the room, you change the media, you change the decision-making process, you change the culture. Using collaborative design. So this is about how do you move from a posture in which you're the director or you're the author or you're the film, you know, you're the creator of the game, and the people that you're covering are your subjects. Instead, if you reposition them as your collaborators, as people with their own innate wisdom and whose lived experience brings value to the table, you get a different type of media product. So this project, CareForce, it was created with and for people who are either home health care workers or housekeepers or maids. It reframes them as heroes. So there's an entire campaign where they have these sort of collector cards where they have hero costumes, and they gave them costume elements to put on and to do social media with, and they created an augmented reality car where you could go around and you could point your camera at it with an app, and it would tell you, it would bring up videos about the ways in which these collaborators make people's lives better, you know, the bravery that they show, the fortitude, etc. So it's a cool project, definitely worth spending some time on. Adopting universal design practices. So universal design is basically the thing that resulted in what are called curb cuts. It's the reason that you can roll your bike up a curb, because there's a ramp. If you design for a range of people's abilities, you make media and design and narrative more accessible overall. So this has been coming up again in the middle of the pandemic, because when everybody had to suddenly go home and work from home or do classes from home, a number of people with disabilities said, well, we've been doing this for years. Like, here's how you do it. And some of the accommodations that have been made as a result of these types of design practices, like closed captioning, have proven to be really good for everybody and useful in a number of different ways. So if you start from that lens, you get a different result. Set editorial standards for new media forms. So inside of traditional media, there have been decades and decades of ethics discussions around the ways in which you represent people, how you fact check, what constitutes an ethical documentary practice. We're having to revisit those right now. One of the current debates is around how you understand what's real and what's not in a digital video. There's a series of lectures happening right now around this question of deep fakes. Deep fakes are pieces of video that look as though they're actually a real person saying something or doing something, but a fake face has been laid over on, or a fake voice has been generated so that it falsifies what actually happened. So there's a set of lectures happening right now on these deep fakes, and a lot of concern about the ways in which they could be used in our political life and in ruining people's personal lives. Make a business case. So part of the question is, if you are creating something that might only appeal to a smaller group of people, is that going to be profitable? Or if you're involving more people in a team to create that product, why should you make that team more diverse? So there's research in the toolkit around why that actually is profitable and why you should do it, not just because it's ethically responsible, but because it's good for the bottom line. Okay, so then, I know I'm going very fast. Elizabeth, am I making sense and tracking?
You're making great sense and you're tracking perfectly. You have like somewhere between 4 and 8 minutes.
Okay, so then the last section in section 3 is this larger systemic change one about cross-institutional, interdisciplinary solutions, like overarching policy, etc. A lot of the people we interviewed for this were most concerned about this one. How do we get more funding? But also, oh, sorry. So here's one example of a fund that was created with support from a number of different foundations in order to diversify pop culture around the concept of pluralism. So they have done a number of different interventions. They've created special writers' rooms to help existing shows review their content and see how representative it is. They have funded a number of different experimental projects around fandoms and pop culture and the ways in which making things more participatory and opening up different avenues for participation change the content potentially. I could go on, but I have more things to say, so I'll keep going. That's one example of how you can fund people and projects that are new and different. Another way in which media makers are entering emerging media is as business owners, and that takes a lot of skills that they may not already have. So that's an area for intervention. And then expanding pipelines. So how do you get people into emerging media and technology at a younger age? How do you track them through so that they don't drop out when the going gets tough? What kind of mentorship can you offer? All of these types of solutions. I had mentioned media literacy before, so another thing that people need, another systemic intervention is creating a wide-scale materials and programs to educate people about the dangers of social media, privacy, surveillance. This is one example of a film that is quite eye-opening. I saw it at Sundance with the makers, and it was mind-blowing. Foster digital and cultural literacy. We talked about that a little bit. Combat algorithmic bias preemptively. So understand that these algorithms can be dangerous and try to get more transparency around them. So this is a project to basically create a like a nutrition label for data so that you can see what the data source is, how it was originated, where you can check it, what it's about. This is one in many different efforts to try to create more transparency in this sort of black box environment we're living in, where people are telling us things and we don't know if we can trust them or how they come up with it. Commit to creating humane media. So there are a number of different initiatives around trying to address inequality and all the bad things that are happening in social and digital media. Here's a film that just came out yesterday. I need to watch it, I haven't seen it yet. From the Center for Humane Technology. So perhaps worth putting on your watch list, and in the toolkit, you'll find other links to other efforts. Design for justice, well-being, and prosperity. Inside of the design movement and inside of the design industry and inside of various other media industries, there are efforts to try to elevate certain ways of doing things, to create standards and codes of conduct, to create guidelines. Those are in the toolkit. Prepare for unintended consequences. So sometimes when you're making a media project, you think it's going to do something great, and it actually does something terrible. We have seen that in large scale with Facebook, for example, but it's true too for individual media projects. This is part of a deck of cards that I actually created. Let me grab it. To help media makers think through their engagement strategies. So some of the other suits are around interfaces. So what are you making audiences? Who are you making it for? Engagement models, emotional responses. And then this new suit, like we had positive social outcomes, and then we're like, oh, what about all the bad things? So this is a tool to help you think through what might happen once you've created something. And then part of the systemic change in making media for good is resourcing new forms of public media. So, you know, we have radio, we have TV, we have apps now. That took a lot. there are no public funding sources for emerging media forms like VR and AR, and also there are not a lot of funds to try to get populations who are not already able to use those, don't have access to them, online and into the mix. So there's a very long section that you can read about that. And then finally, Kamal didn't talk much about the Guild of Future Architects, which she's now leading, but there's an entire discipline of world building, which is used by people who are designing games and large speculative films, which has been kind of broken open and reconfigured for to allow people who are making emerging media forms around social justice issues to use those techniques in their own work. And in the case of the Guild of Future Architects, to use these world building and futuring and scenario planning techniques to reimagine better futures for all of us. So here's one example. There's a Center for Indigenous Futures at Concordia University, and there are several other examples in the toolkit. And I will stop there.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Thank you. So I'm going to, if you could maybe stop sharing your screen, and now I'm going to ask everybody to raise your hand or write questions you can write it directly to me or publicly, and I will call on you for questions, thoughts, concerns. Let's see, but I can't see everybody. So let's see, anybody have a question or comment? No questions or comments? Oh, okay, Pray. Pray. I'm unmuting you. There you go.
Hello.
Hello.
Great presentation. Thank you. So I guess I kind of know the answer, but I think maybe I should just ask. What advice do you have for opening up that conversation between, our friends, our colleagues, our professors on how we can include inclusion, what can we do differently? Because I know my old job, we needed to have this conversation a long time ago. So what can we do? How, give us some help.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little more obvious now that this is a problem. It's obviously in the headlines every day, and there are any number of articles and shows and books that people are now reading that they were not before, some of which are in the toolkit, that are conversation starters. So that's one way to do it, is to not necessarily approach it from, a place of personal affront or some kind of accusation or any kind, things that people are on the defensive. So, to use somebody else's work as a point of entree, or to say, I've been reading this, or did you see such and such, is one way to get into the conversation without making it about the environment that you're currently in. There are some tips in the toolkit, links to tips, and there is a lot of, there are several guides and starter kits if you want to go out and do research into it. I think it's difficult for all of us to have these conversations. So you have to expect some pushback, but it's obviously crucial. So we all got to get used to being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Jessica. I have lots to say on that, but I'm going to let Brandon Harris ask the next question. Okay.
Hey, you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for presenting. Really insightful I have a question from that I've been holding since last week, but I think it's still a little bit relevant. Um, I'm in another class this semester, also taught by Professor Strickler, and we've been talking about old power versus new power structure.
Mhm.
And after reading the foreword, I've gotten the impression that your team is on the side of new power by providing unique perspectives and being empathetic to inclusiveness and certain groups of people,
Mhm.
which is even more relevant by this lecture where you're outlining problems and providing solutions. But my question is, as this industry is emerging and it's still in its infancy, do you see any like big money companies or film studios, media companies that are trying to introduce old power structures into this industry?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that this toolkit and the people that I work with and the people we've interviewed are exist in contradiction to many different commercial media products that have the types of narratives and assumptions that we think are wrong. Like you can pretty much assume that those are out there and that you can find them easily, and there are lots of us who've spent many years of our lives unpacking those and dissecting those, and after spending a bunch of time doing that, we decided, well, it's better to just make your own stuff and try to fight it. So I mean, you name it. Disney, any large media corporation, you're going to be able to find, or game company, you're going to be able to find some pretty offensive and harmful products. It's not, you don't have to look far.
Do you think that that they are kind of gaining? Do you think they're gaining more traction than the work that you're doing to kind of counteract that?
I think they have more money and they have better distribution channels.
Right.
A lot of the work that we're showcasing here is pretty new and it's experimental, and it's not necessarily available in a mass market. I think, we have seen some, I mean, say what you will about Black Panther or even some of the other sort of efforts like Mulan, for, efforts to try to diversify at least the primary characters in big
Those-
screen epics, we've seen some movement and we've seen some proof that these types of projects can actually gain traction and audience and make money. So that's progress. It's not all bleak, but generally speaking, this is a form of activism. This type of media production that we're talking about.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great question, Brandon. Chrissy, I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. That's wonderful. My question is, your knowledge is so vast and the research it's overwhelming yet so encouraging. During this process, given everything that you've come together and you've known and have placed all in this one guide, was there anything in this journey, in this process, that actually kind of took you off guard or surprised you, or was a discovery that was completely unexpected? Was there anything that kind of hit you out of left field?
I mean, the entire process of trying to understand these new forms of media and how they shape reality, and actually being in the headsets and having my senses taken over by virtual reality, or encountering, like Mal was talking about last week, Micah, this character in augmented reality who is completely digital and like hands you something. Like those small moments of epiphany throughout have been amazing, and it's been interesting to be guided by my own gut, even as I'm trying to be very analytical in the work. I think it wasn't news to me that there are biases in society. I think a lot of us over the last year have had to really take a second look at ourselves and our own assumptions about our behavior and the ways in which we wield power and have power. I think, that has been kind of a widespread kind of reckoning among people who thought they were doing good in the world, and they had to take another look at it. I think that's been, you know, that continues to unfold. My husband's a professor, and we talk about this like every night at the dinner table, and talks about his students. So I think that's like a generational process that is it's gonna be with us for a while. You know,
So it's all just
does that answer your
evolving,
question?
really started.
Um, Thank you, Chrissy. All right, Kristen, I'm gonna have you go next.
Hi. Thank you for sharing this with us first. It's a big honor to be able to see something in the making and help you work through how you want to share that story.
Good.
You touched on a couple of data privacy concerns, and you know, we are generating so many points of data. When we plug in more artificial intelligent capabilities, we go from a social media sentiment score to how you actually felt, maybe your blood pressure, maybe your heart pace.
Yeah.
I don't think laws or any privacy regulation could keep up. So what do you think would happen in that future state if we are, as companies or as entrepreneurs, being more conscious of how we treat the individual's privacy?
I mean, I think part of what we're missing is a rights conversation around the ways in which we should be able to control our own data, and to take back certain elements of this monitoring that has become pervasive, and to see that as our property. So, you know, basically we're being mined for all of this, and it's being turned back around on us. It's hard for individual makers to resist those types of structures when they're working inside of them. So there's an organizing project there to try to reframe privacy as a human right. There's a policy fight in order to try to restrain companies from collecting and using certain kinds of data. And there probably is a series of court battles that are going to happen to address like specific harms that result from them. So it's a multi-level set of interventions that that will need to be coordinated in order to sort of push back the tide.
Because we're still just fighting for equal representation of different demographics. We're not even fighting the bigger fight of, well, everyone's personal data too.
Yeah, I mean, they're not necessarily the same fight. I mean, they both need to be fought, but I think there is definitely a dawning awareness that this is pernicious, and that there are alternatives being built where you can actually use something like Signal or other encrypted versions of the tools and platforms that we all use on a daily basis. And you can make personal decisions about, you know, what you're going to reveal and which platforms you're going to use. That only goes so far unless those are organized into more of a boycott. But you could be aware of your own security practices, and you can make choices in the interim while we're all trying to sort this out.
Yeah, big issue. Okay, next we have Gatsby. Let me find you over here. Okay, I'm going to unmute you. Gatsby, go ahead. Oh, I didn't, okay. Unmute. There you
Okay.
go. Sorry.
I did it on my side. So thank you once again, Jessica, for a great presentation. I missed a little bit of it, so I apologize for that. But this is more of a toolkit question, because I'm finding myself doing more DEI work and racial reckoning work within various settings, and wanted to know from you the very best video that you have come across that can help in the racial reckoning space.
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I have a good answer. A lot of the racial reckoning work is written. So there are books like White Fragility. There are books about, hang on, pulling up my list. Ibram X. Kendi's book. There was a book that he worked on too that was more for a younger audience. There are a lot of the toolkit works that are being referenced are specifically around digital media. So there's a list in here. Can't find it. Sorry, I don't have an immediate answer for you. It's really an ongoing debate, So there's a little bit of just-in-time delivery, given whatever atrocity we're addressing in a given week, because every new shooting or statement from the president is greeted with a outpouring of activism and analysis and commentary. So yeah, I don't have a single work to offer, sorry.
All right, thanks so much. I just found myself using Jane Elliott over and over again, so I wanted something new, but thank you.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Yeah, we can all be on the search for things that are impactful to us and share them in the class. Okay, Jed, I'm going to have you go next. Let me find you here. Unmute. Hey, Jed. Wait, hold on. I'm trying to, there you go. Hey, Jed.
Hello. Really good presentation, but I have one question about corporations like Facebook and Netflix. Do you think they're more beneficial or detrimental to diversity within the industry?
They're very different. I think, Facebook was supposedly designed as an equal opportunity platform for everybody to use in the way that they want. The question becomes what content is being elevated, and also how do their advertising patterns deepen existing biases. So that's one set of questions. It's very different from a Netflix, which is content that is relatively curated, relatively high level, and has an array of different audience demographics that it appeals to. I mean, it's also very algorithmically driven, so there are some of the same critiques there around the ways in which people are being sort of shunted into particular content streams and then sort of held there. I think my experience of watching Netflix is that it's broadened the array of potential, creators and talents that people can be exposed to and can access. So on balance, I think that's good. It also injects money into the production system that might not be there otherwise. Corporations are not inherently good or evil. It's just that when power and money is concentrated, it deepens the effects of existing inequalities. And it gives people an outsized influence to make programming decisions and coverage decisions. So it's those abuses of power that you have to watch out for, more than things being just commercial or non-commercial as your yardstick.
Interesting.
And how do we make sure that these corporations don't abuse their power?
You have purchasing power. There's shareholder activism. There's critique. So purchasing power, you have boycott power. There are antitrust regulations, for better or worse. They're not terribly they're not sophisticated enough to deal with the current generation of technology companies yet, but they have the potential to at least halt consolidation. Yeah, so it's like a lot of these social problems. There are an array of interventions. Just depends on where you want to try to get into the fray.
All right, well, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Judd. All right. Last question is going to be Monroe. And let me, you unmuted yourself. Okay, cool. Good.
So yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. Really glad I chimed in here. So I was kind of wondering, in digital spaces or apps such as Bumble, they make it so that men can't be the first one to reach out. And I imagine that this is, you know, to kind of boost women and make sure that it doesn't get so toxic so quickly. And then in sort of beta testing Facebook Horizon, you might have seen that they don't have the option to use the beard on your avatar, which I thought was really interesting.
Huh.
And just kind of being in that space, it made it a lot more comfortable. And I imagine it was like a kind of response to places like Rec Room or Alt Space, which become kind of overwhelmingly like white bearded people surrounding you. And I was wondering if you thought that this would be a good solution to kind of creating a more equitable digital space. And if so, are there other good solutions to kind of balancing the playing field like this?
We ran an interesting article on Immerse. Let me pull it up. It was about how to make social VR more gender friendly.
Mhm.
I think, you know, part of that is just a question of which service you choose.
Right.
And so people have preferences, you know, so some people don't necessarily want to be reached out to first or whatever. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. Sorry, just multitasking. I think, you know, there are different levels of creating codes of conduct for these types of spaces and different levels of moderation. Unfortunately, we've seen that harassment tends to crop up in completely unmoderated spaces. So different ways that you can moderate, you can have sort of voting up and voting down, people being policed by the community itself.
Mhm.
Definitely avatars and the way in which people are represented and can represent themselves is a hot topic and is something that continues to be refined so that you can not only you know, choose something that is comfortable for you, but something that really represents the way that you picture yourself.
Mhm.
But each of these approaches has a downside. So I don't think we've arrived at a perfect solution yet. But I'll try to find this article and share it with Elizabeth, and maybe she can share it with the class.
Awesome. I'll check out Immerse as well. Thanks so much.
Jessica, do you have a hard deadline or do you have time for one more question?
I have time for one more question.
Okay, awesome. Sherry, I'm going to let you go next. Hold on, it just takes forever. Unmute. There you go.
Oh, great. I didn't know if I was going to have time. I missed this last week as well. But I have a question more on how do you see emerging media content impacting individuals with disabilities, specifically individuals that have physical disabilities? You know, we talk about inclusiveness, but essentially that's always race, the demographics, and the culture. But how do we as creators really create like innovative media where you know, these individuals are included, whether that be on an educational front, film, social. And then my other question, I'm gonna go ahead and hit you with both. When you compiled all your information, I guess with all those people that you interviewed, were you able to actually include individuals with disabilities, whether that be physical or whatever? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head because Kamal did the interviews, but I know that this was a topic in the toolkit when I was talking about universal design principles. If you go to that section that's about that, you'll find both some books and some projects that are about how to create media that's accessible, how to work with those types of communities in order to beta test things and make sure that people can actually access them. Some of the ADA and other sort of legal guidelines that help to ensure that these things are taken into consideration. Also, I'd refer you again to Immerse. We've run a couple of stories on this question around, here we go. So if you look at issue number 22, if you go to immerse.news, past issues, look at issue number 22, we ran a themed issue on that question. I can find some resources there.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, I would just want to thank Jessica again for the presentation,
Yes, thank you.
but also for the book. I mean, we feel so fortunate to be able to read this book. Not only the class is reading the book, but actually the CMII faculty and staff are reading the book as well, as a way to get, to have a conversation, like you said, take someone else's media and then use it as a conversation starter. So, so appreciative of that. And we feel fortunate to just have, you all have just responded so quickly to this, this request. And, she literally got the book today. People wanted to know if you're taking orders for physical books, because some people don't like reading the digital book.
Yeah, so as of, I think 2 days ago, if you go to makingyournewreality.org, you can order a single copy, or if you wanted to do a bulk order, Elizabeth, I don't know if you feel like coordinating that. I think it would get a little cheaper if you did a bulk order.
Excellent. Wonderful.
And looks good enough to me. I mean, I ordered it partially so I could see how it turned out. So we'll go with it.
The graphic design is just unbelievable. I love it so much.
Yeah, well, we're really lucky to work with this group of designers. They're amazing.
Yeah.
And we're really excited that you're going to be featuring some of the other interviewees over the course of the semester. And we're hoping we can come back at the end and see what you learned and see what we left out. So this is kind of a round one. We're hoping there are going to be additional versions of this in the coming years.
Excellent. So you're doing what we say, eating your own dog food by having your end users give you feedback so they can kind of be co-creators. That's awesome.
Exactly.
Love it. Okay. Well, thank you again. And I'll see everybody on the Discord. If you are confused and lost and have no idea what's going on, 2 o'clock tomorrow, I sent the Zoom link out. Thank you again.
Thanks so much. Great to see everybody, and good luck.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.